Peter Tchir of Academy writing the following. Increasingly, the patience with waiting seems to be dissipating as the markets are looking for results. Pete joins us now for more. Pete, good morning.
Morning.
You are uniquely positioned as a firm to talk about this. We often say this, stacked with military experience over at Academy. Can we talk about the facts on the ground at the moment? Do you see the US and Israel making progress? Are we making progress?
Yeah, I think we're making progress. We went through a list of all the things that we want to attack and bomb, and we've been going through those, I think, successfully. Now, I think when we look at the Strait in particular, the big difference there is when we're talking about this at Academy with a lot of our generals and admirals is when Iran is firing missiles at Israel, various places, right? They travel for a long distance. There's half an hour, there's an hour, there's time to scramble. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles at its widest, right? So there's the ability, if they are launching from close to shore, there's only minutes before that drone hits. And so I think that's the next wave of this is kind of eradicating their ability to target ships from close to the coast. But that is going to be very difficult. General Bellin, she said one thing, this was more about the Houthis. It's kind of rude, but I think it's very true. She was talking about them. It's hard to bomb someone in the Stone Age when they already live in the Stone Age. So these are people who are prepared for this sort of fighting, shoot, hide. So that's where it gets difficult. And I think that's why this is dragging on.
We're conditioned to buy in the equity market. We being investors, Wall Street, market participants, conditioned to buy an equity market whenever it dips. We've seen that repeatedly, largely because when things get tough, there is a belief the president backs off and changes his approach to things. Does he hold the keys to the outcome of this?
You know, it does seem like we are winning, but to me, there's this race, right? It's us winning, trying to make progress towards some sort of regime change. At the same time, Iran's ability to keep oil prices higher. And to be honest, oil is probably the third or fourth most important thing that we talk about lately. We're much more focused, I think, on liquid natural gas. LNG is a problem. And I think when we look at this, the U.S. is somewhat, comforted because we have our own supply. China has their stockpiles. I think this is becoming very important within a week for Asia ex-China. You're starting to see, I love going on to NIChem and searching force majeure. It's like kind of a cool word, but it's dangerous, right? And you're seeing more and more force majeure. And again, one of our other generals who spent a lot of time actually ran BP Anglo South American oil business, he's reminding our clients, when you turn these sorts of facilities off, it's a 1 to 3 week startup process again. So this is starting to me, I think if we're still talking about this next week, Asia is in trouble. This
headline from Axios Crossing just seconds ago, getting some further details on what's happening here. They're reporting that Israel struck the largest gas processing facility in Iran. Looking for further details, the Israeli strike was carried out with approval of the United States. That's coming from Axios just moments ago.
So the second part of that headline is, I think, what I find a little bit confusing, because this administration definitely does not want to see an energy shock, definitely wants to try to make sure that consumers aren't the ones vulnerable for what Trump would call an excursion, this war in the Middle East. So it would be interesting that the White House gave it a basically green flag to strike a huge gas processing facility within Iran.
Reporting from Axios, Pete, from a senior Israeli official, the Israeli Air Force struck the largest natural gas processing facility in Iran, located in the southwest of the country. The strike was carried out in coordination and with the approval of the United States.
So when we've been kind of wargaming and playing this out internally, I think that Trump obviously likes maximum leverage, right? And the problem I think we're running into right now is maximum leverage requires, hitting their oil fields, hitting that, whether it's on Carg Island or elsewhere, and kind of reducing their ability to generate income. The flip side of that is everything that we do that puts maximum pressure on them probably puts maximum pressure on us in terms of disrupting oil. So I think this is a real delicate, balance. I don't know which way it swings out in the end.
At the same time, people are saying the U.S. is less sensitive to higher oil prices, and ultimately this is a problem for Europe, not necessarily the United States. Increasingly, the U.S. and assets here are considered havens once again. How far does that go? I mean, do you think that the market is being overly complacent about how much the U.S. economy could get hit?
Yeah, so one thing I do want to say is I think we should maybe temporarily suspend the Jones Act, and that's the act that forces U.S. ships to go from U.S. ports. And that's one reason we ship a lot of gasoline out of the south and we import a lot into the north. So I think we could do some things like that. Having said that, I think this is really coming down to the supply chain. It's going to be fertilizer. It's going to be plastics, the ethene, the polyethylene, benzene, right? As you start seeing those slow down, especially in China or Asia, it becomes our problem, right? What happens when someone who's trying to make a phone, for example, in India, can't make it because some components not being produced in India because of the plastic? So global supply chains, I think that's one thing we learned so much from COVID, right? They're very intricate, they're very fragile in many ways, and I always go back to what the CEO of Whirlpool said. A washing machine that's 99% done is not done. And I think that's the growing risk here, is little disruption to the supply chain that no one would think about, and all of a sudden we have problems down the road. I think we're not there yet, but again, I'm increasingly nervous the market's not pricing this in a week we're going to get this, ooh, shoot, we are in deep trouble and we're 5% down.
Well, so listening to Jeff Curry and listening to yourself, I'm ready to sell everything and go to cash and ultimately hide in bed. And at the same time, Delta and American Airlines come out and they talk about how consumers are spending so much that it offsets the losses that are felt in higher costs from some of these supply chain disruptions. How far do these disruptions have to go before the momentum in the U.S. consumer isn't enough anymore to stave off a true downturn?
So I think on this side of the equation, it has to start disrupting our actually good supply chain. So you have to actually see final goods having problems. So it's not just the oil and gasoline, it's going to be plastics. It's going to be shortages of something where people are like, ooh, wow, so-and-so's not going to make their quarter because they're not getting their goods finished. Again, we're not seeing that yet. I think that comes down the road. The flip side of this is what's happening in jobs, right? You know, because of this attack, no one's talking about the worst job report we've had in a long time, NFP, right? So there's weakness there. You're seeing, I think, a credit pullback. And I'm fairly comfortable where credit spreads are right now, but I think credit's getting tighter, right? Credit is an integral part of keeping this economy rolling. So if you start seeing companies not get access to credit, you got to slow down there. I think individuals, we're seeing some of that again as well, where we've been talking about this for a little while, but the working poor, there seems to be an increasing number of people who have jobs and are still struggling to make ends meet. And that's a very unique situation. We've never really had a recession kind of caused by that. So I think these things are all adding together. And if I'm the Fed, I'm going to try and be more dovish. I don't think they will be, but I think there's risks from all sorts of things that are hitting us right now.
Peter, you mentioned the Jones Act. That waiver is the first lever for the administration to pull, and we have reporting that that's coming within days. What else do you think they're going to do? Because I keep hearing that there, minimum, is a discussion about an export ban when it comes to U.S. fossils and fuel products to the rest of the world.
Well, to some extent, I think you almost need the Jones Act to be repealed temporarily to do that, right? Because otherwise you can't take the oil and gasoline that we have sitting in the southern ports and bring them to the Northeast. So I think that's a step in that. Yeah, I think this is, again, I'm going to go back to what we've been discussing now for a year. You know, I try and mention every second time I'm on. PROSEC, or Production for Security. This has just been a giant wake-up call that everyone has to produce more of their own stuff. And I think anything that's integral, if it's electricity production right now is one of the most important things, probably always has been. Every country has to be re-looking at where they're generating their electricity, how they're doing it, and making sure they're less dependent. Again, I think the president was in Scotland the other day. I don't always agree with everything the president says, but he kind of gave them a lot of grief for not using their own oil in the North Sea. Like, yeah, why aren't you doing that?
Pete, what happens to states like California that are highly dependent on Asian imports?
I think this is, again, you're going to see even within the U.S., some states do much better than others. Again, those who are adopting this, those who are really willing to do this smelting, refining, they're going to see this shift, right? And they're going to pay a price for that. So again, I think everything has a cost right now, and regulatory environments went one way, and now you're seeing kind of the problems that are caused by these bottlenecks.
Pete, it's always good to see you. Thanks for dropping by. Peter Tchir there of Academy.